Good evening. My name is Lauren Anderson, and I am the Manager of Alumni Relations at Johnson & Wales University. Thank you for joining us for today's session titled Sip with JWU, Hip Hip Hooray for Beaujolais. We are excited to bring this program to you virtually and look forward to this walkthrough of the villages, styles, and tasting of this light red wine, Beaujolais. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. With the exception of the presenters, all participants have been muted. Please leave your cameras turned off until the tasting portion of the presentation. When directed, if you would like to turn your camera on, please do so. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat button on the bottom of your screen. We will refer to this section to take questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Set your view to speaker view in the top right corner of your screen. This will be the best way to see our presenter. We suggest selecting small, active speaker video as the view. Since we can't be together in person, please keep it social. Feel free to share pictures of your at-home setup, a selfie, or photo of who you are enjoying this session with. Be sure to tag @JWU alumni in your posts on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Sarah Malik. She is an associate professor in food service management at the JWU Charlotte campus. Her areas of expertise include beverage appreciation, hospitality systems, restaurant management, and wine and spirits education. Originally from the United Kingdom, Sarah studied institutional management and hotel catering at Manchester Metropolitan University and has an MBA from Oxford Brookes University. She worked for Hilton International and Queen's Moat Houses as food and beverage director and Bass Charrington Breweries and West Midland Taverns as general manager. Studying in Switzerland with Don Smith and the pioneering menu engineering program for a summer developed into a 5-year assignment where she was involved in educating students in hotel management. As a visiting professor at the JWU Providence campus, she realized that was where she wanted to settle and raise her family. Sarah has worked as a general manager running 2 hotels in New England and then returned to JWU where she has worked for 20 years as a wine and spirit educator. She received Teacher of the Year in 2004. Sarah is a Wine Spirit Education Trust Diploma Merit recipient and member of the Society of Wine Educators, where she has earned Certified Specialist of Wine, Certified Specialist of Spirits, and the Certified Wine Educator Awards. Sarah has also earned a diploma from the International Sommelier Guild and has been part of the Banfi Wine Education Program and the Napa Valley Wine Academy. Sarah regularly appears on television, presenting segments on wine and spirits. She has also presented at the Society of Wine Educators Conference and BevCon discussing the English sparkling wine revolution. We are so grateful to have her and her level of knowledge at JWU, and I'm thrilled to have her with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming Professor Malik.
So good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. It's always a bit nerve-wracking, unfortunately, with Zoom, that you think no one can see you and no one can hear you, but I think that everything should be good, or Lauren will be shouting out. So thank you for joining me and everybody this evening. And our topic tonight is going to be all about Beaujolais. And I don't know, we'll probably find out in a little while where all of you are located, but here in Charlotte, we had a 73-degree day today. So this is actually a perfect wine for very, warm weather. So for everybody out there, all the alumni, wherever you are, I hope you'll enjoy this presentation. We will definitely sort of give you some opportunities at the end to ask questions. And, just a few slides into it, once I've done the introduction, we can certainly get you to start tasting. What I'm going to do, though, is just share with you a little PowerPoint presentation. But don't worry, there's not too many words. There's just lots of pictures, and it really helps me explain what Beaujolais is all about. So I'll share this with you, and then we can get this started. Okay, so Beaujolais is probably one of my favorite wines. So when I was asked to do this, it was really a no-brainer to choose this wine. It's a wine that is really very, very easy drinking. And if you ask a lot of people, very seasoned wine people, what is their favorite wine? This is usually the #1 that they choose. It's a perfect one that you can actually start I suppose the transition from sort of cold winter nights where you're drinking maybe heavy reds and you're moving into those warmer sort of summer wines, the white wines and the rosés. Beaujolais is sort of like an interim. It's really a very easy drinking wine. What we sometimes use the term in Europe is quaffable. It just means that you can pop it in the fridge. It doesn't matter if it's just a little bit chilled, and you can drink it very, very easily as an aperitif. You can have it with food, you can have it with cheese. And so what I'm going to do is explain to you a little bit today about Beaujolais, because a lot of people do get a little bit confused on why does it smell like bubblegum. And so I'll kind of explain this hopefully with you over the next few minutes or so. So Beaujolais is actually a place, and there is a very specific grape, which I'll go over in a moment. But if you actually look at the screen, you can see on the left-hand side the map of France. And just a little bit further south of Burgundy is this region called Beaujolais. It actually used to be very much associated as part of Burgundy, but really this is a separate area because it has such a different philosophy of winemaking and a very different grape. If you actually look to the right-hand side, you can see that there are, if you look at the map, you can see there are very specific appellations on the map. And this is really dictated about the soil. I think most of you are aware that in France, it's all about the place. They don't really worry too much about the grape, but they really do worry about the soil. This is the key. Which way the sun is shining, what angle is the slope facing. These are very integral to the French philosophies. It's not very big. If you look at the left-hand slide, you can see that it's really about 61 square miles. So it's not very big at all, but it actually produces way more wine than Burgundy. And a lot of people don't know that. They think it's a very small producing area, but it's not. It produces an awful lot of wine. 98% of it is red. You can get white, which I'll explain in a moment. About 2% is white, but 98% is red. And the grape growers and the winemakers are very, very small. They have very small land holdings. So a lot of the time you find negociants or big consortiums that will buy the juice or buy the grapes off the grape growers, and then they can actually make that wine under their own brand. Recently, what we've seen though is a lot of very small artisanal winemakers selling their wine, very, very revered. So I'm going to show you some of these, and maybe it'll guide you when you go out and maybe purchase Beaujolais down the road. So what we have here is a beautiful, lovely wine. And if you have your wine in front of you, please, I'm sure you've poured it, but if you haven't poured it, this is the time to pour it. And by all means, you're more than welcome to pop your cameras on so we can all see you drinking the wine. I actually poured two today, and I poured a Beaujolais Village and I poured Moulin Avant. And so we're going to go through these different appellations in a moment and explain them to you. The grape is a grape called Gamay Noir à Jus Blanc. It sounds a little strange because if you do speak French, what that actually means is the Gamay with the white juice. The reason they did this is because there is another Gamay, Gamay Noir, that is actually totally different. You see some of this particular varietal in California, but this particular one here in Beaujolais is the Gamay Noir à Jus Blanc. It is part of the Pinot Noir family, and if any of you are familiar with Pinot Noir, this is a very troubled little family, probably like most of us have in our cupboards as well. They tend to mutate. This is a kind of branch of the species that tends to, from one year to the next, completely change its personality. It can be very unpredictable. And unfortunately, Gamay is part of that family. So it does have a tendency sometimes to change from year to year, but a lot of it is controlled really well now by the wine making. It has been documented for many, many years. It was actually the Burgundy grape until the Grand Duke decided to kick it out because he thought it was more of a peasant grape, and it actually ended up in Beaujolais. Beaujolais has very specific soils, which I'll show you in a moment. So it actually was a blessing in disguise. What you're going to see in a minute is just a couple of things in the vineyard and a couple of things in the winery that maybe help you understand this grape a little bit more. If you do have Beaujolais Blanc, if you do ever come across Beaujolais Blanc, it's no surprise that in proximity to Burgundy, this is actually the Chardonnay grape. So what you actually have here is really a white Burgundy from the Beaujolais area. And some parts of Beaujolais in the north do come under a sort of big regional map. So you do actually find that this is a little bit more Burgundy driven. But yes, Beaujolais Blanc is Chardonnay. So if we actually look at the vineyard, what is really quite fascinating if you go down to this part of France is the vines. I think most of us are quite familiar with the vines that grow up and then they come out like arms and we trellis them along wires. You've probably seen these types of vines before, but they're usually associated with very hot parts of the world, certainly in very warm parts of Spain and in South America. This is actually called the bush vine. In Beaujolais, they call it the gobelet vine. And literally, it is like we would be planting a sort of rose bush in our garden. And you can see that the branches just come out. The arms of the vine just come out, like literally the rose bush. And then the grapes will grow underneath. The whole point of this is to actually really protect a lot of foliage on the top, protects those grapes from being burnt by the sunlight. But it's not that hot here in Beaujolais. It's certainly warm, but it's not as hot as some parts of the world where you see this style. So it's quite fascinating to see this. It's very, very much associated with Beaujolais, and it's called the gobelet system. Now, the soil is really important in Beaujolais. I did say to you, and I'm really excited to see what some of the wines are that you're actually trying. But in the northern part, we see a lot of very, very degraded granite and schist type soil. And if you actually look at this picture, that's exactly what it looks like. This is a very, very hard soil and it's good. It really doesn't look very appealing, doesn't it? It certainly doesn't look like our garden. But what this actually makes our vines do is it makes them dig deep and search for water. So instead of being kind of a lazy vine that kind of just pumps out tons and tons of leaves and no concentration of fruit, what you find here is that because this vine is really having to work hard, you get less, I suppose, less foliage, less vigor, we call it, and more focus, more development of bunches of grapes on these vines. But this is very typical of what the soil looks like in Beaujolais. I want you to just bear this in mind though. Have a look. These are not mountains by any shape or form. They're hills, but they're absolutely crucial because what you should bear in mind is when they actually position these vines, what they're looking for is to make sure that they're facing south. And then they're going to get the sun rising in the east, setting in the west, and you're going to have sun all day. Also, when you have an angle, and I think we've talked about this, those of you that have come to the wine sessions before, if the slope is actually at an angle, the rays from the sun are actually a lot more powerful. So this is a very important part of the vineyard. So we've got this very specific vine, we've got this very specific soil, and this soil is crucial to the flavor of Beaujolais. Something that is very unique to Beaujolais, and this is quite common, is actually picking the grapes whole bunch cluster. So no, we cannot bring in harvesters to position over the vines and shape them so the grapes fall. What we have to do here is pick them by hand. And the reason is because this is directly related to how we make the wine. This is very similar to Champagne. We do the same thing in Champagne. We also do the same thing for very, very good quality vineyards in the world. This is because we really don't want to break the skins of the grape and we want to keep them in a whole bunch form. So you can see here, it's a very arduous task carrying these baskets on your back and picking the whole bunches to put them into the basket. They'll put these into obviously like a skip, and then what happens is they will take these to the winery. And you have a look here and you can see this exactly how they end up in the winery. And this is what we call the whole cluster fermentation process. And you can see here, these are Gamay grapes. So quite interestingly, what you're probably noticing if you're tasting your first wine, is that these wines are very low tannin, high acid, and very, very fruity. So it's a really fantastic combination to have for easy drinking wine. So once it arrives at the winery, this is where things get a little technical, but it's not too bad. But this is really why this wine tastes the way it does. So when you're smelling this wine tonight and tasting this wine, you're probably picking up lots of lovely red fruit, raspberries, strawberries, perhaps roses. You might even be picking things up like bubblegum, there's cinnamon. So there's so many different components in Beaujolais. Every single time you open a bottle of Beaujolais, it's completely different. And it's different because of the soil types. There's so many different types of soil in just one area. But what is really the key to the taste and the aroma of Beaujolais is how we make it. So just to remind you a little bit, we know that fermentation, we get the grapes, we crush them, we end up with juice, which we call must. We then add yeast, and then this ferments, and the yeast consumes the sugar, and we end up with alcohol and CO2. The CO2 will just dissipate into the air, and what we end up with is this very nice fermented liquid. What's a little bit different with this is we have a term that we use called carbonic maceration, and it's a very interesting method of making wine. So typically, I'm going to show you just pretty much the old-fashioned, this method is slightly adapted now, but what we're technically doing is we're actually making this wine without oxygen. Now, this sounds crazy because a lot of people know that if you don't have any oxygen, your wine can sometimes taste a little reductive, which means you get sort of rubber, those sort of weird sort of off smells. But what they do here is they will actually put the grapes, these whole bunches, into a vat. One alternative is to literally pump in CO2 into this tank and seal it. And what happens is these grapes have what we call an intracellular fermentation. So typically what we have when we make red wine is just regular fermentation. But what we're seeing here is the fermentation process is actually taking place inside the grape. Now, what happens here is when this fermentation process starts, it pulls the tannin and it pulls the color into the flesh of the grape. So what this is technically doing is it is reducing the tannin that would typically be in contact with this wine, with the normal way that we make it. But this carbonic maceration, unfortunately, it will only get to about 1 to 2%, but that's sufficient because what happens here is we're pulling in the tannin, we're pulling in the color, and also this malic acid is being generated, which normally would affect the taste of the wine. But what it's actually doing is creating alcohol. And this is what is giving you these very unique flavors. Now, if I just show you this picture here of the grape, on the right-hand side, that's typically what our grape would look like. But on the left-hand side, this is after carbonic maceration. So when you put these grapes in, there's another alternative way of making it, which is used more commonly, which is you will put the whole bunches into the vat. The bunches at the bottom are being pressed down by the weight of the grapes on the top. And what happens is at the bottom, they will just start splitting and fermentation will just occur naturally. Well, as you know, CO2 will come to the top. And what the winemakers do is they seal the tank. So the CO2 will press down on the middle and the top batch of grapes. And what you end up having here is intracellular fermentation taking place. So sometimes you have carbonic maceration and sometimes you have semi-carbonic maceration, which means you're having simultaneous fermentations taking place in the tank. It's a little technical, but basically what you're doing is you're fermenting without oxygen and you're doing intracellular fermentation. You're actually fermenting the inside of the grape. But as I said to you, when it achieves 1 to 2%, and this can take, sometimes winemakers take 2, 3, even some winemakers take 4 weeks just leaving this to occur in the tank. But once that's happened, you then unfortunately do have to continue fermentation naturally to get to the achieved levels of 12.5%. But when you look at that left-hand side grape, you can really see how all that beautiful color has been brought into the inside. And so this is what it looks like. If you see the picture here of the hand, you can see that lovely color. And this is actually what will end up ultimately into your glass. So the characteristics, here's the weird thing, the characteristics of semi-carbonic maceration. Technically, yes, of course, the Gamay grape is going to give you lots of red fruit and black fruit. But why it smells like bubblegum? Why does it smell like bananas? Why does it have cinnamon and violets, kirsch, roses? Is all really to do with this process called semi-carbonic maceration. Believe it or not, the actual malic acid, the component to malic acid that evolves from this process, is actually put into bubblegum. So it's not so much that bubblegum tastes like Beaujolais, it could be the other way around. So it is quite common. For me sometimes, especially when I drink Beaujolais Nouveau, which I'll explain in a minute, this particular wine, I sometimes smell the weirdest things. I sometimes smell like, I can see myself with my little children in the summer in a little paddling pool. I smell like baby toys in a paddling pool. It's the strangest thing. So don't be surprised if you come across some very strange smells and flavors with Beaujolais. But look at the pictures. Are these not beautiful to have in wine? So we'll just look at the different styles so you can now understand what is Beaujolais all about. Well, we have really three different places, if you want to call them appellations. We have Beaujolais, we have Beaujolais Village, and we also have the 10 villages, these very special cru villages. Beaujolais Nouveau is not a place, it's actually a style. And what it is, it comes out third Thursday in November every year. And it's a bit like, hey, here I am. This is going to be what I'm like for the next year. It's sort of a declaration of the vintage. So what we can do here is have a look at the Beaujolais. So we have a map on the right-hand side, and I'm not going to get too technical. I want you to be drinking this as I'm talking and really understanding what I'm saying about these beautiful flavors. If you went out today and bought just Beaujolais, what this means is your grapes are going to have come from really the more southerly parts of this region. Can you see this sort of very light beige color? It's more in the south, and the soil here is more limestone and clay. This isn't bad because this is actually the soil structure of Burgundy. So I'm sure the Burgundy winemakers would be not too happy for me to say, oh no, this soil's not as good. It's perfectly fine. But in Beaujolais, the Gamay grape prefers granite. So this particular part in the south does not give as much complexity to the wine as you would perhaps get if you chose a wine from the north. And what you're going to probably find here is this Beaujolais is very affordable, $8, $10, $12, $15. Unfortunately, there has been a little bit of a price increase over the last couple of years due to just some very crazy weather and a little bit of tariff additions on the wines. So this one here, Georges de Boeuf is a very famous producer in Beaujolais, and this is where you would typically get the grapes. The grapes would be sourced from these areas here. If you wanted to spend a little bit more money, anything in Europe, the more quality, obviously there is a direct correlation with maybe the cost of the wine. What we're looking at here, as I said to you before, is the French believe it's the place. They really are not that concerned about the grape. It's all about where it's from. So if you actually look at this map, you can see here a little bit more darker. This Beaujolais Village is here, and you can see this orange, more orangey color. And this is the Beaujolais Village. Now there are 38 of these villages, and they are positioned on, the soil is starting to get a little bit more granite in it, a little bit more quartz. It's like a pink quartz. It's still got limestone, it's still got clay, but you're starting to see the soil structure get a little bit more complex, which will clearly be transferable into the wine. Now, yes, the villages that we're going to go to in a minute, the 10 cru villages, there's 7 of them that are part of this Beaujolais Village, but there's a couple that are not because they think they're just way above Beaujolais Village. So these are really good bet. If some of you have bought Beaujolais tonight, that's perfectly fine. But if you've bought Beaujolais Village, you would certainly notice just a little bit more complexity in that wine. And what you can start to do is you can actually buy Beaujolais Village, and some of the villages, you know, have been allowed recently to sort of put their village on it as well. And then, of course, Beaujolais Nouveau, the 3rd Thursday in November, which falls around Thanksgiving, and this is the Thanksgiving wine. It's like cranberry sauce. I mean, it's just so fruit driven red fruit, easy to drink. So when you actually serve it with turkey, it's absolutely perfect. Most of the 57% of the wine is consumed in France, but 43% is exported. And the biggest consumers are Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. When I lived in the United Kingdom, we would always go the day before because they release it on the Thursday, and people would drive down from England into France, buy the wine and bring it back. So it's sort of like a car race. Some people fly and you bring it back, and the hotel I worked in, we would serve it for breakfast. And so everybody knew it was Beaujolais Nouveau Day. So believe it or not, most of this wine gets drunk on that day. And it's really fun. If you're ever in France for Beaujolais Nouveau Day, it's just another day to celebrate drinking wine. Georges de Boeuf is a really amazing producer, so artistic. Their labels are just eye-catching. We certainly see these very commonly in the United States. So this year, please, in November, third Thursday, keep your eye out. And this year, I bought mine from Costco, and it was only $10, which was great. And I bought, I think, 3 bottles. This is the last one I have left, and it's perfectly lovely. If you're looking to have a really in-depth discussion about it, that's not going to happen. It's just a simple, quaffable wine that you could probably put into the refrigerator. And then finally, so if any of you have bought one of these 10 villages, these are what we call the 10 cru. And when you say go into the grocery store or you go into the wine shop, what you're going to do is look for one of these villages. If you have a look at the map on the right-hand side, you can see these 10 villages are all in the northern part of Beaujolais. Why is this important? Granite. This is solid granite, schist, quartz soil, which Gamay just seems to just adore. And what you get is very complex wines. But even if you looked at a wine like Fleury, if you can see Fleury on the map here, a little bit just south of Juliana, even in Fleury, they have 12 different climats, 12 different sites with very distinctive soil. So it's sort of just this rabbit hole in a way that you go to, say, Fleury, and you fall in love with this wine, but then there are sort of 12 different potential styles. So what I did for you is, as I say, this little chart, because it really is up to your style. And what you can see here is I've broken it into 3. And perhaps some of you could kind of either chat at the bottom, or you could maybe just hold your bottle up. But did any of you buy any of these cru villages tonight? So if you prefer a lighter style, what you've got here on the left-hand side are the villages of Cherub, Fleury, and Saint-Amour. The fuller bodied styles, if some of you like a more powerful Beaujolais, then you should be looking for Bruy, Côte de Bruy, Juliana, and Renier. And if you want to buy a particular cru, which is what I did, I actually have the age-worthy one. I actually have Moulin à Vent. And Moulin à Vent is, I'll show you on the slide in a moment, means windmill. And this little village just has windmills all over it. It's very pretty. But Moulin à Vent can be aged. A lot of people think Beaujolais should be drunk maybe 1 or 2 years old, and that's true to a point. But if you choose these cru wines, you can actually keep them for maybe 5 years, and they'll still be totally drinkable, vibrant. You don't want to leave them too long, because if you don't have too much tannin and structure in that wine, which you don't really have with Beaujolais because the tannin levels are very low, this is not a wine that you really want to keep for 20 years. 5 years, yes, not longer than that. So the age-worthy styles, if you look at the right-hand side, you've got Chenin, Moulin à Vent, and Morgan. Morgan's my particular favorite, but I did choose Moulin à Vent to taste with you today. So when you actually, and these slides, we will just kind of, you know, go through and have a little look at them. But typically what you'll see on the label, and I've sort of done the slides in the sort of light to age-worthy, fuller-bodied, sorry, to age-worthy. The label will look exactly like this. So you can see here, and I put the phonetics, not that I speak French perfectly, but you can see that this one on the left here is exactly what the label would look like, Cherub. I had to, when I was studying wine to take exams, we had to learn these 10 exactly, you know, how to pronounce them. We had to know the soil, we had to know north to south. So we all came up with songs. We used to just do mnemonics to try and remember them all. And to this day, you always say to people, oh, do you know the Cru villages? And they come up with some crazy song that they created because it was the way that they remembered them. But we have Cherub here, and you can see on the label, Appellation Cherub Contrôlée. It's telling you that those gamay, the grape has come from Cherub. This one on the right-hand side, Fleury. Fleury is often regarded as the queen of Beaujolais. This is the more feminine one. The reason is because with Fleury, in the Second World War, a lot of women took very much all over France, and Champagne and Beaujolais took control of the land. And so this was a wine that was made by women and was extremely made in a very feminine style. Cherub is actually just a very, we were talking about elevation before. This one is a little higher up. So what you have here, where it's higher up on a vineyard, it's a little bit cooler. And if it's cooler, then you have a little bit more acid. So those of you that prefer acidity in your wine would probably want to go for Cherub. It's certainly one of the more lighter, more acidic wines. So last week, of course, was St. Valentine's Day. And there's a lot of criticism of this particular village, Saint Amour, the saint of love. And this is one of the most northerly regions and certainly one of the smaller regions. But the Beaujolais winemakers get very frustrated about this because they think that people come and just buy Saint Amour at Valentine's Day. So they get very disgruntled about it. But how beautiful. Why would you not buy that bottle on St. Valentine's Day? It is a very pretty wine and extremely lovely labels. They really do kind of play with the marketing. The two, if we're looking at kind of the Fleury being feminine, and I'm sorry to use this term, but if you really want a more powerful, structured, I suppose as we use in wine language, more masculine type wine, then Bruy is certainly the one. Bruy and Côte de Bruy are not, they really are not part of that Beaujolais village. Remember I said to you there's 38 different grapes, 38 different villages, and 7 of these 10 are happily involved in that, but these are not. These are 2 places that do not want to be associated with Beaujolais village. They're just so elite that they want to be on their own. The Bruy certainly is the flagship of the Lyon region. And if any of you have been to this part, there are 20 Michelin star restaurants in Lyon. This is the home of Paul Bocuse. This is Paul Bocuse's 3 Michelin star restaurant. So on the planet, you want to go to a town that has more Michelin star restaurants, go to Lyon. And just a little bit next to Lyon is Bruy. And this is really beautiful wine. The more approachable one, however, is the Côte de Bruy. And Côte de Bruy certainly is a more approachable one. In France, or the French language, côte means slope. So what we're seeing here is we've got Bruy, the appellation, but we've got Côte de Bruy, which is the slope of Bruy. And so again, just a little bit more altitude, a little bit more acidity, and certainly more approachable. So again, this is your decision whether you want to go the sort of more powerful Beaujolais or perhaps the more approachable ones. But both these are super highly rated. Juliana, something that is so fascinating about this part of France, if you haven't been, and we're all going to travel, trust me, when this is over, we're all going to travel and we're going to go to these places that we can only dream of while we're tasting the wine. But this was an area that was very much controlled by the Romans. The Romans, if you imagine, came up through Italy and settled certainly in this part of France. And so what we have here is a lot of these wines are named after lieutenants in the Roman army. And this one, so I didn't mention it, but Bruy is named after Brulius, which was a lieutenant, but Juliana is named after Julius Caesar, because right in this area is where the Romans set up camp. And this one here, again, whenever you see the labels of Juliana, there's always these beautiful kind of images on the label. Of course, they moved certainly way up out of Beaujolais into Burgundy. And what we saw here was eventually, about the 8th century, the disintegration of the Roman Empire, and the monasteries took over. And this is why, when the monasteries took over, a lot of these areas, the monks would literally walk around figuring out terroir, soil, hills, sun, and recorded it for hundreds of years. So we should thank the Romans for bringing winemaking and vines to France. But that's about all. You know, we're glad they went, and we're glad that the monks took over, and that they can actually, you know, really get the wine industry back to the way it should have been. Renier is one of the youngest. This one, when you actually want to be awarded an appellation or contrôlé, there's a lot of processes that you have to go through. And Renier is one of the little babies. This one has only, you know, the last 20 or so years been awarded the appellation, but it's a very, very pretty wine. And then we have Chenin, one of the smallest as well. And when you look at the map here, I tried to take pictures of the vineyards. So everything I've got on here is the village. And these are villages. I was very fortunate to live in Switzerland for 5 years. And if you literally drive out of Switzerland west, you do end up hitting Beaujolais, coming down through Burgundy into Beaujolais. And I used to take students here. Can you imagine how fabulous that was? And we would just be in an old minivan, and me and a couple of other teachers would take about 20 students, and we would literally drive through all these villages in the northern parts. And you literally see a village like this with a couple of bars, always a church, if not 2 or 3, and then vineyards all around it. And we were fortunate one year when I took the students that they were picking the grapes. So we were allowed to go into the central area and watching them crushing all the grapes. It was superb. And so here you can see this very tiny cru Chenin, absolutely microscopic area, producing, you know, the grapes for this particular wine. And on the right-hand side, this always struck me, this area. When I went through Moulin-à-Vent, it was literally like the Sound of Music, you know, just beautiful hills, windmills, picturesque houses. And it probably is one of the more highly rated ones. Moulin-à-Vent is not cheap. You are going to probably pay $25 to $30 for some of these cru villages. So I completely understand if you just opted for some regular Beaujolais tonight. I agree with you. Moulin-à-Vent can be up to $40 a bottle. And some people go, you know what, I'm not paying that for Gamay, but you should try it. A lot of people will say, well, I'm going to try Burgundy Red. But Beaujolais is just absolutely exquisite. So it's worth paying a little bit more money. In this part, though, when I was in Moulin-à-Vent, they have a lot of iron and manganese in the soil. And this actually does bring a lot of complexity to this wine. And it is a wine that you can actually keep for a longer period of time. And then, of course, finally, Morgon. I had this wine 2 weeks ago, and it was a night like this, and everybody kind of ran out in Charlotte to where we were allowed to sit outside in 20% capacity or whatever. And we opened a bottle of Morgon, and it was like I was in another world. I'd forgotten, I had literally have not been out for months socially. And it was like, I think I just embraced this wine. Perhaps I never would have embraced it before, but because I was sitting outside and I was actually had makeup on and was looking quite normal, it was just the most beautiful experience. And Morgon is wonderful. It is actually on a very famous slope called Prix. And the soil, can you imagine this blue stone, this very, they call them rotten stones, believe it or not. It's 430 million years old. And so what you find if you buy Morgon is this very powerful, very meaty, I know that's a strange word, extremely powerful wine. So what we can do before we sort of do some questions, I'm just going to check, I think we're in great shape, is perhaps look at a tasting comparison of these wines. Did anybody buy 2 wines to compare? Because I'll happily just explain these with you. You can by all means put your cameras on and you can show me your wine or just tell us what you're drinking. It's no problem. We should really make this a nice informal time. Are they allowed to speak, Lauren, or not?
It's best to put it in the chat. That way everyone can see it clearly. So
if they put it into the chat, would any of you like to share what you are drinking? Okay. Sorry, I'm going to just stop sharing this so I can see you all.
We have some Beaujolais Margone, Côte de Bruy.
Oh my gosh, these guys have like dropped some money. This is brilliant. Fleury. Oh my gosh. What's next to Fleury? Wow. That's amazing. Oh my God, I'm so glad you bought these wines. So, absolutely lovely wines. So what I've done is, of course, trying to be organized. I bought this Chateau de la Vanette Beaujolais Village because, again, this is the Beaujolais Village that we were talking about, that typically the villages can participate, 38 different villages. But what we're starting to see, the gentleman I buy the wine off said that we're starting to see these very small families making these very unique wines. So I bought this one, and this is really very pretty. And then, of course, Moulin à Vent. So I picked up this Moulin à Vent, which by Philippe Pacolet, or Pacolet. So these are the ones I'm going to kind of look at and compare. So what you'll notice with these particular wines, and I put them in my big girl glasses tonight, is you can see certainly that these wines, when you're describing them, for me, my Beaujolais Village is purple. You know, it's got this lovely cerise, purpley pink. There was a word my student used the other day called magenta. I love that word. I think this is what it is. It's this sort of magenta. And what I typically do with Beaujolais, you know, if you can put your fingers behind the glass and see your fingers, you know, this is no way a deep intensity of color. I'm in Rhode Island because it's February, Beaujolais Village. Yeah, absolutely. And so this, for me, Beaujolais is never deep. If you were drinking Cabernet Sauvignon, for sure, even Syrah, you know, you might be looking at a sort of deep colored wine, certainly a Southern Italian wine, but most Beaujolais is sort of light to medium. So certainly for me, my Beaujolais Village is definitely more purpley pink, but my Moulin à Vent is ruby. It is 2017, so it is 3 years old. And I don't really see too much brown in it. If you do see a little bit of brown, obviously we can kind of talk garnet. But certainly if you hold them at a 45-degree angle, I always say, look at the sort of 12 o'clock point in your glass, and that gives you a really good indicator of the color of the wine and its intensity. So for me, the Beaujolais Village smells just, you know, red fruit. Really very reserved. It's not kind of powerful, it's quite shy. And the Moulin à Vent, now I can smell violets. I mean, it is one of my favorite flowers, but I can definitely smell flower, more floral on this Moulin à Vent. There's definitely more complexity of aroma on the Cru Village than the Beaujolais Village, no question. I would say this is sort of like light intensity and maybe 2 or 3 descriptors, whereas I think this is more a medium intensity, and I could probably write 4 or 5 things about this. And when you sip this wine, any of them, if you have 1 bottle, you have 2 bottles, sip the wine. What you're going to notice in your mouth is the acidity. Acidity can be sensed all over your mouth, but where you're going to pick it up is on the side of your tongue. My test taster for acid is water. If you start building up saliva, lovely conversation, I know, but if you build up lots of saliva under your tongue and your mouth gets very watery, that's very indicative of high acid. So I can just feel that acidity in that wine. What is nice about it is it does have a little bit of tannin. It's certainly drying my gums and the roof of my mouth, but not to the point that I can't speak. You know, Barolo tannin up here, Beaujolais tannin way down here. So for those of you that are not a lover of that very astringent sensation in your mouth, the Beaujolais is definitely the way to go. Now, what is weird is this one smelt very aromatic. This one tastes more complex than this one does. That's strange. And I was told by the guy I buy the wine from that this was a really great little family making this Beaujolais Village. So interestingly, the Moulin à Vent, lovely on the nose, a little bit reserved on the palate. The Beaujolais Village, little reserved on the nose, but quite nice on the palate. So just a slight variance. But can you sense when you're tasting this sort of fruit, this sensation you have in your mouth? This is really to do with that carbonic maceration. A very unique way of making wine. So it's sort of, as I said to you, helps bring that tannin down a little bit. The finish or the length on the Moulin à Vent was a little abrupt. I'm going to ask my money back on this one. But this one here, this Beaujolais Village, I can still feel it. And often a finish, the length, is indicative of good, well-made wine. So when you were tasting this, I'm so glad that I can see you all tasting. It's wonderful. Did you feel that? Can some of you chat and say that you sense that? Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Colorado. Snowing. Yeah, Louis Jadot, Beaujolais Village. This absolutely lovely. Some of these choices you have: Beaujolais Village, Beaujolais Village. Oh, Morgon. Lisa has Morgon. Fabulous. Louis Jadot, La Perlière, Côte de Brouilly. So Latoya, what did you think of this Côte de Brouilly? Côte de Brouilly, got quite a few people have got Brouilly. Abigail got Brouilly. How was that, the Brouilly? Sean got Fleury.
Yes, called your name.
Pardon?
Hi, this is Latoya.
Hi, Latoya.
Hi. So yeah, the Côte de Brouilly, I kind of agree with you with the same assessment you had. My Beaujolais Village was very, very flavorful on the palate. The Côte de Brouilly, I found it to be a little bit more reserved. Like the acidity wasn't quite as high as the Village.
Interesting. So I think what we're proving here is that we can definitely buy these Cru villages, but these Beaujolais Villages are equally as lovely. I think that little secret, the fact that you've got 30, my brain just went, I think it's the Beaujolais effect, 38 villages, only 7 of those 10 Cru villages participate. So you've got 31 other villages. And I think it could be like a little competition thing going on here, you know, trying to, like, especially with these smaller little family. I think this is the way it's going. We're seeing it all over France. There's more families, smaller family units. Sean, what did you think of the Fleury? Oh, so Kathleen had 2 Fleuries. Leather, tobacco, light red fruit. Yeah, I think this is really, it's interesting how some of you are picking this up. I think the Kathleen is saying the wine store expert gave us 2 Fleuries. We taste light red fruit, leather and tobacco, which is very typical of, you know, some of these Cru villages. A little bit more tannic, has a longer finish. Yeah, this whole tannin conversation, you know, I think it's, I don't know whether you've ever watched those Somme movies. I love them, you know, but if you, I think it was the first one. I love the guy that was like a rebel and, you know, his dad said he was never going to be very much. And he ended up like passing all the exams. And I remember he was asked, what is your favorite wine? And he said, Beaujolais. And he said, why? And he goes, because it goes with everything. And it's true. food. If you ever go on the Beaujolais website, what you're going to notice is you can have it with dessert. Because the tannin levels are so low, you can have it with fish, or oily fish even, because sometimes salmon is a really popular dish, but when you actually have tannin and oily fish, your mouth starts to feel like you're chewing aluminum foil. It has a kind of metallic sensation. So the beautiful thing about Beaujolais is it's fish friendly, but it can stand up to chicken, it can stand up to meat, and it's super good with you know, desserts and cheeses. I mean, you don't have to eat, for goodness sake. So I'm just checking here the questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll have Sarah answer some questions until the rest of the program.
Ask me anything. If I don't know the answer, I won't make it up, don't worry. Yeah. But don't you agree that this is a very food-friendly wine? You could probably just appease everybody that they come around to your house for dinner. You've got people that quite like tannin, people that don't. This would be a real kind of crowd pleaser. Sean feels that he was robbed because his village was more expensive. So French style chicken with apples and onions. Oh my gosh, that sounds great. Yeah, I think, you know, again, it's just got so many components in it that are food friendly. I know it's a bit sacrilegious, but what do you think about chilling it? A lot of people think that putting red wine in the fridge is naughty. I did a video on this on my Instagram, which you are more than welcome to watch. I have it's sort of like this, my Instagram. I have these moments of spurt and I do videos, and then I have this sort of lapse of where I don't do too much. It's just, I'm wine queen. That's the Instagram. But I did a video on about chilling red wines, and I was kind of nervous to put it up because I thought I'm going to have all my friends, my very bougie, you know, master sommeliers and master of wines and wine shop owners, like literally having a fit. But they all agreed with me. They said, no, you're absolutely right. If a wine doesn't have too much tannin and it's very fruity and it has good acid, there's absolutely nothing wrong with popping it in the fridge. Not too long, maybe half an hour before you serve it. You don't want to get it too cold because it will mask all the aromas and flavors in the wine. But there's nothing wrong with having it a little bit chilled. Valpolicella from Italy, this, you know, would be a great example to put into the fridge. I always put wine that I bought that's revolting in the fridge, and it actually tastes pretty good. One of my friends actually puts Coca-Cola in hers. I know. But yes, this is something that you could certainly, ideal temperature, I think you could probably put 45 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, certainly room temperature, we talk about 55 Fahrenheit. I think this one you could get away with 45 to 50, and I think it would be lovely. I always chill my wine no matter what it is. We have a wine called Soif at the vineyard I work at, and we serve it chilled, maybe a little too chilled. I know people that put ice in their red wine. I do put it in my white sometimes, but for sure, definitely in the red. Yeah, mine are quite cold because my house was cold, and actually I really like it. I think it's really, you know, refreshing. One thing that I think that we've noticed through this traumatic year that we've had is, yes, we're drinking more. There's no question about that. People are very nervous about putting their recycling out in my street because it literally will wake up, you know, sleeping babies with all the bottles. But one thing I think we've noticed is that you don't necessarily have to drink on a Friday and Saturday and with food. From speaking to people who are dealing with so many things, especially teaching little kids and working and remote and all the nonsense that we've dealt with, this is a great one just to have without any food. I mean, you literally could have this chilled as an aperitif. Wine with just a little bit of cheese. So I think that's, and I just told you, you can put the stopper in it and pop it in your fridge, so you can just kind of keep going there. And I think this would last beautifully. I've had Beaujolais in my fridge for literally a week and it tastes perfectly fine. You know, so I don't think there's anything to worry about.
Lots of great conversation in the chat. Sarah, would you say this is a year-round wine or more of a specific time of year to drink it?
It's a year-round wine. It's a 7-day-a-week wine. It's a 24-hour-a-day wine. I mean, not 24. No. It's certainly a wine that I drink all throughout the year. I'm not a lover of tannin. I'm a wimp. So I actually love Beaujolais. I love the Gamay grape. I love Pinot Noir. I like kind of very light wines. So I drink it year round, definitely. But I think what we're seeing here is this transition, as I said to you, from spring to, winter to spring. It's a perfect one. What temperature range? So in that northern part of Beaujolais, where it's sort of, on the border of Burgundy, if you like, we still kind of refer to that as a sort of continental climate. Big diurnal shifts, so a lot of cool mornings, cool evenings, weather max 68, 70 degrees. Probably European summers are not long. So, we look at California and it has these long growing seasons. Beaujolais has this very short growing season. Sorry, France in general, you get this sort of summer, and so what sometimes you have to rely on is just sort of as much sun as you can get. And it's a very sunny part to a point. Now, the further south you get, and this is probably why we're tasting a lot more with these Beaujolais and Beaujolais Village, it gets warmer and it's sort of more of a what we call a semi-continental. It's actually starting to head towards the Rhone Valley. So you're certainly getting Mediterranean influences. And so the temperature, we're talking about going into sort of the mid-70s for the more southerly part. But you know what it's like in France and Europe. You can never, it's not like we see here in the United States. Climate is what we're supposed to have, weather is what actually happens. So I will tell you in the 2018, 2019, they had hail, they've had ice storms. I mean, we've just seen Texas going through it, it just this ridiculous weather. And that's why we're seeing a huge increase in Beaujolais prices, because the demand is greater than supply. And if you have this freeze, this frost, either in spring and fall, or you have hail, this can just damage the whole vintage. So just crazy weather and tariffs. We've been hit with a lot of additional tariffs on French wines. So when we import that into the United States, we're paying the penalty for that, unfortunately, as well.
So we have one question that we'll finish with, Sarah, from Latoya. And she said, are there other regions or countries that are growing Gamay grapes?
So Gamay, there is that one I said to you earlier, so we've got this, the one that they specifically use in Beaujolais is the Jus Blanc, and there are actually 2 other Gamay species in Beaujolais as well, not used as much. They're sort of weaning those off, but we can get Gamay in California. It is technically related, but California has Gamay. Yeah. And nice, really good. I mean, some of these winemakers, certainly in the central coast of California, they're, nuts, they do whatever they want. They're making great wines, trying different grapes. And that's where I've seen Gamay.
Wonderful. Well, Sarah, this was a fantastic presentation and great discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will turn it over to Chris Plano to close us out.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Lauren, for moderating tonight's Sip with JWU. And thank you, Professor Malik, for leading us on tonight's tasting experience with Beaujolais. It was such an informative and interesting discussion. We are grateful that you shared your time with us this evening and appreciate your insight on this wine variety. Your love for JWU and passion for wine education is so appreciated. We'd also like to thank all of our alumni attendees for joining us tonight and getting a taste of the JWU experiential education our students receive daily. As we continue to adapt to the changing world and the future of the hospitality industry, your support is essential. When you make a donation directly to the College of Hospitality Management, you help ensure our students have modern facilities, lab spaces, and technology resources. You also help bring new courses and degree programs to students to prepare our rising stars for an industry that will need to be rebuilt and reimagined in the coming years. Gifts of all amounts add up to make a collective impact, and if you're in a position to give this evening, please click the link in the chat window. Thank you. We sincerely hope that you enjoyed this evening's session. Hip, hip, hooray for Beaujolais, part of the JWU For You family of programming. Through JWU For You, alumni can engage in informative and interesting discussions related to professional development, social, and avid interest topics. Join us on Tuesday, March 16th, our JWU 24 Hours of Giving for another Sip with JWU featuring Professor Brian Warner presenting Irish whiskey and Scotch. For the full listing of upcoming events, please visit our events calendar at alumni.jwu.edu. We appreciate your attendance this evening and wish you a wonderful night.